Okay, I need your honest reaction to something, because I still don't know if I'm overreacting. So, a friend of mine just quit her job. Proper job, stable salary, nice office, the whole thing. And she's leaving next month to travel for a year.
Right. And you're saying that like it's a crime.
No, that's the thing. It's not the travelling. It's that she wasn't miserable. She wasn't burnt out. She just thought, I'd quite like to see the world a bit. And then she handed in her notice, calmly, like she was ordering lunch.
I have to admit, that doesn't sound that dramatic to me.
Wait, really? Because I sat there thinking, isn't that risky? You've got security, you've got routine, you've got a clear path, and you're just stepping off it, voluntarily.
Well, I suppose here it's not immediately labelled as reckless. Lots of people take time out at some point. Gap years, career breaks, even just a few months off between jobs. It's not always seen as abandoning something. Sometimes it's just a pause.
See, when you say pause, it sounds gentle. In my head, it sounds more like jumping off a cliff.
That's quite a vivid image. I mean, of course there's risk. There's always risk. But I think people here often frame it as experience, as something that adds to your life rather than disrupts it.
But what about her parents? That's the part I still can't wrap my head around. They were completely fine, supportive even. They said it would be good for her. I nearly dropped my tea.
I love that that's your breaking point, not the job, the parents.
Of course it's the parents. Where I grew up, if you casually announced you were leaving a stable job to find yourself, that conversation would not end quietly. There would be questions, lots of questions.
There'd still be questions here, to be fair. It's not as if British parents are completely hands-off. But the tone might be softer. Less "don't do it" and more "have you thought it through?"
That difference in tone changes everything, though. One sounds like concern, the other sounds like doubt. And when you grow up hearing one version, the other feels strange, almost unreal.
Funny thing is, it's the same decision, same resignation letter, same plane ticket, yet the emotional temperature around it shifts completely depending on where you are. By the way, if this is your first time here, this is Mind the Gap. We usually talk about everyday British English, the kind you don't really hear in textbooks. Anyway, back to your friend. Where's she heading?
South America. No fixed schedule, just a backpack and a vague plan. And I'll admit, part of me thinks that sounds amazing. The other part is slightly terrified.
That makes sense. Excitement and fear often travel together. Maybe what's interesting isn't whether quitting is normal or crazy. Maybe it's why it feels so different depending on the story we grew up with.
That thing you just said about the story we grow up with, I think that's exactly it. Because when I heard she quit, the first word that popped into my head wasn't brave, it was unstable.
That's quite telling, actually.
Where I grew up, stability is almost the definition of success. If your job is secure, your income is predictable, and your future looks organised, people relax. They think, good, you're sorted. So walking away from that feels like you're stepping backwards.
I see what you mean. Here, though, the word success gets used a bit differently. It's not always tied to permanence. Sometimes it's more about whether you feel fulfilled. Parents might ask, "Are you enjoying it?" before they ask about salary.
That question still surprises me. Are you happy? It sounds lovely, but it also feels slightly abstract. Like, what does that even mean long term?
Fair point. Happiness isn't exactly a pension plan, but at the same time, staying in something you dislike just because it's stable doesn't sit well with a lot of people here. There's this idea that you shouldn't endure forever if it's draining you.
See, endurance is almost praised where I'm from. If you stick it out, that's admirable. If you leave, people might think you gave up too quickly.
That's interesting. Over here, leaving can sometimes be seen as self-awareness, as in, I've realised this isn't for me. It's framed as growth rather than failure.
All right, but let me ask you something. If you're happy but broke, is that still success?
That's the uncomfortable question, isn't it? I'd say most people would hope for a balance. It's not that money doesn't matter, it absolutely does. Cost of living here isn't exactly gentle, but the pressure feels different. It's less earn more to prove yourself and more earn enough to live the life you want.
That's subtle, but it changes everything. Because if success is about proving yourself, you're constantly being measured. But if it's about building a life you enjoy, the competition feels softer.
Although, to be honest, competition is still there, especially in cities like London. Ambition hasn't disappeared, it's just expressed differently. People change careers more freely now. They retrain, they pivot, they experiment. That used to be unusual, now it's fairly common.
I think that's the part that feels brave to me, not the travelling, the willingness to change direction. Because where I'm from, once you choose something, you're expected to stick with it.
And here, sticking with something purely out of obligation can feel heavy. So in a way, both sides carry pressure, just from different angles.
One pressure says don't disappoint anyone. The other says don't betray yourself. Neither sounds particularly easy.
No, not really. Maybe that's why your friend quitting feels so dramatic to you. It's not just about the job, it's about which voice she's choosing to listen to.
And maybe that's why I reacted so strongly. Because part of me was thinking, would I dare?
You asking, would I dare, actually says a lot. Because sometimes it's not just about courage, it's about timing, whether it feels like the right age to do something.
Oh, timing is everything. There's almost an invisible schedule where I'm from. Study first, then proper job, then maybe buy a flat, then marriage, then children. It's like if you're too early or too late, people notice.
That sounds exhausting, to be honest.
It can be. I once went to a family dinner and an aunt asked me, completely casually, "So, how old are you now?" Which is never just a neutral question. You can feel the calculation happening behind the smile.
I can imagine the mental checklist ticking away.
Exactly. It's not even aggressive, it's just awareness. If you're approaching 30 and still single, someone will ask, not to attack you, just because that's what people do.
That's interesting, because over here the pressure shows up in slightly different places. Moving out, for example, there's this quiet assumption that once you're in your early 20s, you'll want your own place.
So if you stay with your parents longer, people talk.
They might not say it loudly, but yes, there can be a bit of judgment. It's often framed as independence, as if living on your own proves you've grown up properly.
That's funny. Where I'm from, staying with your parents longer can actually be practical. You save money, you're close to family, no one questions your maturity because of it.
See, that's what fascinates me. Same action, different interpretation. One place calls it sensible, another might quietly label it dependent.
It's almost like every society has its own clock, and if you fall out of sync, even slightly, you feel it. Maybe not from everyone, just enough people to make you aware.
That's true here as well. People might not push you to marry early, but there's still an unspoken timeline about career progression. By a certain age, you're expected to be moving somewhere, upwards ideally.
So even if the milestones are different, the pressure never really disappears.
Not really, it just shifts shape. One culture might ask, when are you getting married? Another might wonder, why haven't you been promoted yet? Either way, someone's watching the clock.
That actually makes me feel slightly better. I used to think one side was completely relaxed and the other was strict. Now it feels more like different expectations, same weight.
Yes, and perhaps that's why your friend's decision felt so dramatic earlier. It wasn't only about quitting a job, it nudged the timeline. It disrupted the rhythm people assumed she'd follow.
You're right. It wasn't just she's travelling, it was she's stepping off the schedule. And once you step off, you don't quite know how to measure yourself anymore. Do you know what else I've been thinking about? It's not just big life decisions, it's the small, everyday disagreements. Like in meetings, that's where I notice the difference most.
Oh, what kind of difference?
I remember sitting in a meeting once and the manager asked if anyone had concerns about the plan. Silence. Absolute silence. Everyone nodded, meeting ended. Then outside the room, people started whispering about all the problems.
That's quite familiar to you, I imagine.
Very. It's not that people don't disagree, they just don't want to challenge someone publicly, especially if that person is senior. It can feel disrespectful.
That's interesting, because here it can look almost the opposite. In a meeting, someone might say quite calmly, "I'm not sure that will work," and no one gasps. It's just part of the process.
See, when I first heard that phrase in a meeting, I froze. I thought, wow, that's bold.
It doesn't always feel bold here. Often it's just clarity. The idea is that if something isn't going to work, it's better to say it straight away rather than let it collapse later.
But doesn't that create tension? I mean, if someone directly questions your idea in front of everyone, doesn't that sting a bit?
It can, of course it can. We're still human. But the tone matters. There's a difference between attacking a person and challenging an idea. Ideally, it's the second one.
That's such a subtle line, though. In some places, even questioning the idea can feel like questioning the person.
True, and to be fair, British politeness can be confusing too. Sometimes "I'm not entirely convinced" actually means "I strongly disagree," so it's not always as straightforward as it sounds.
So either way, you need to read between the lines. I suppose the difference is where the disagreement happens, in the room or outside the room.
That's a good way of putting it. Here, if you disagree, the expectation is that you voice it early. Holding it in might be seen as unhelpful. Over there, voicing it too directly might be seen as disruptive.
Which makes me wonder, which one is actually more stressful? Speaking up in the moment, or carrying your disagreement quietly and discussing it later?
I'm not sure there's a simple answer. Speaking up requires confidence. Staying silent requires restraint. Both cost energy, just in different ways.
That's probably why I felt uneasy in that meeting. It wasn't that anyone was rude, it was just unfamiliar. The disagreement was out in the open, and I wasn't used to seeing it there.
And maybe that's the key. Politeness doesn't mean absence of conflict. It just shapes how conflict appears. Some cultures keep it visible, others tuck it away.
When you put it like that, neither sounds superior, just different styles of managing tension.
You know, when we talk about freedom, it often sounds light, almost romantic. Choose your path, follow your passion, do what feels right. But I don't think it always feels light when you're living it.
That's interesting you say that, because from the outside it can look very free, almost effortless.
Here's the odd bit. A lot of young people here do have choices. Career paths aren't fixed, changing direction isn't shocking. Yet there's this quiet anxiety underneath it all. What if I pick the wrong thing? What if I waste time? What if everyone else moves ahead while I'm still figuring it out?
So the pressure isn't you must do this, it's more like you can do anything, so don't mess it up.
Exactly. Too many options can feel paralysing. When everything is open, responsibility lands entirely on you. There's no one to blame if it doesn't work out.
That sounds exhausting in a different way. Where I grow up, the anxiety feels more structured. There's a correct route. Study hard, get into a good company, climb steadily. The fear isn't what if I chose wrong, it's what if I fall behind.
So one side worries about choosing badly, the other worries about not keeping up.
Yes, and there's this sense you don't get too many chances. If you step off the track, it's harder to jump back on. That's why my friend quitting felt so dramatic. It looked irreversible.
Over here, stepping off the track is more normal, but that doesn't remove the fear. It just changes its shape. Instead of "you must not fail," it becomes "make sure this detour is meaningful."
That's subtle but heavy, because now you're responsible not just for working hard, but for designing a life that makes sense.
I've seen friends struggle with that. They leave a stable job, they try something creative. For a while it feels exciting, then the doubt creeps in. Was this a mistake? No one shouts at them, no relative calls to scold them. The voice comes from inside.
That's interesting, because for many of us, the voice isn't only internal, it's external first. You hear expectations so often, they become your own thoughts.
So either way, pressure ends up inside you.
Maybe that's the uncomfortable truth. Freedom isn't the absence of pressure, it's the shift of where it comes from.
Yes, one culture might guard you with rules, another hands you space. Space feels wonderful until you realise you have to decide what to build in it.
That makes my friend's decision feel less simple. It wasn't just brave, it was heavy in a different way.
It's funny. At the start of this episode, I was convinced my friend was doing something dramatic, almost reckless. Now it feels less dramatic, just different.
That shift matters. Sometimes we assume our reaction is just common sense, as if it's obvious, but often it's simply what we're used to.
Habit disguised as logic.
Exactly. We grow up hearing certain stories about success, about independence, about what counts as on track. After a while, they stop sounding like stories. They sound like truth.
And when someone chooses differently, it unsettles us. Not because they're wrong, because they're stepping outside the script we recognise.
That might be why these conversations matter. Not to rank cultures, not to decide which approach is superior, just to notice the script.
I think I'll still feel nervous if someone quits a stable job. That part probably won't disappear overnight, but maybe I'll pause before judging it.
That pause can change a lot. It creates space, and once there's space, curiosity tends to replace certainty.
Maybe that's what this episode was really about. Not freedom versus stability, not east versus west. Just asking ourselves, why do I react this way?
That's a good place to leave it, I think. Thanks for spending your time with us.
If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might relate.
And we'll see you next week.
See you next week.